in schools. And since my time as an occupational therapist, I graduated like 8 years ago, I've been gradually doing more and more work around accessibility and inclusion in all different settings, a lot of the times like in arts and culture, museums and theaters, but I also really like to do that work in the Jewish community because I grew up going to Solomon Schechter and I went to a Harlem sleepaway camp in the Poconos, and I've had a lot of wonderful experiences, and I want to make sure everyone has those experiences. So that's me. So we just wanted to touch base about some disabilities you might encounter in your communities and your classrooms. So take a second, and if you just open up the chat and type to share with us what kind of disabilities you've encountered. So you might have encountered autism or some sensory integration differences, possibly intellectual disability, some mental and behavioral health challenges like anxiety, ADHD, learning disabilities, physical and mobility impairments, potentially visual impairments, blindness, as well as students who might be deaf or hard of hearing. So these are just some of the disabilities that you might have experienced. It looks like depression, ADHD, a lot of people experience that. Some disabilities that aren't acknowledged or shared by parents, processing issues, a lot of ADHD, learning disabilities, some hearing impairments, autism, cerebral palsy, CP. So a lot of ADHD, anxiety, autism, sensory processing, sprinkled in with some hearing impairments, which is a good segue to Gabby's experience with a student who had a hearing impairment.
Actually, yeah, I just wanted to mention that tonight we're going to be thinking about some of the solutions that we can bring as we're thinking about preparing for our online teaching, and how important it is now more than ever to keep the communication open and really partner with parents. So I was talking to a parent of a student at my school who's been a student for a long time, who does have a hearing impairment, and in person would bring a device that the teacher could wear. You've seen some of these FM systems the teacher would wear in the classroom to amplify the teacher's voice and make the background noise less of a distraction. So I was talking to the mom recently about what the Zoom experience was like for her child. And I thought, you know, Zoom must be better in some ways because you don't have the background of the kids talking. But she said it can be really hard when sometimes you open things up and kids talk over one another, and that it was a challenge. And one of the solutions we came up with that I hadn't even thought about was that Zoom comes with the closed caption option. And Alana, you could take a minute because you're more of an expert than me about how to turn the closed caption option on. But we're going to actually try having someone, not the teacher, but someone who's a volunteer, typing and doing closed captions, so it will support that student this year.
Okay. Yeah, so Zoom, it does not have automatic captioning. You need to turn on, in settings, there's a way to turn on closed captioning, but it doesn't mean you're turning it on like an automatic. It means you're turning on the option for someone to type it. So you need to go into your settings, and I'm happy to help you figure out how to do that if that's tricky, but you can assign someone, either you can type as the host, or you can assign a participant to type. It's not easy to type. Like I've captioned meetings. It's not, I'm a very fast typist, and it's even challenging for me to get every single word. So it's not easy. It's not necessarily the right solution for everyone, but it could definitely at least provide some support for that student if you're even getting some of those, especially the times when it's like a little bit more noisy or whatever. It would really help. There are some tools that have automatic captioning, like Google Meet has an option, a not perfect but pretty good option for automatic captioning. And then it's remembering to turn captions on when you're showing videos. That most YouTube videos have some kind of automatic captioning, and making that a priority is something every teacher can do.
And we'll talk more, since ADD and sensory issues and autism came up so much. we have some strategies to talk about that we'll get to.
Is Zoom closed captioning available for the free account? I'll double check that. I'll check. And if I don't remember, please remind me. So we wanted to, some of you may have seen this graphic, or at least parts of it, or in different contexts. But we wanted to share this particular image. It's 3 slides. The first slide is 3 people. They all have the same size box, so that theoretically they could see over this fence to watch a soccer game. So this is sort of like equality. They all got the same box. The next slide is that, you know, there's 3 people. One is tall, one is average size height, and one is really short. And the shortest one now has 2 boxes so that they can still see over the fence. The tall one has no boxes, so they can now all still see over the fence. Great, we're using some accommodations, wonderful. And the third slide, or the third image, shows all 3 of these people. Nobody needs any boxes, because instead of a fence, or instead of this like wooden fence, there's now like a metal fence that's see-through. And so nobody needs boxes anymore, because they can all see through the fence. So I describe this, so this slide can be called many things. I know Rabbi Michelle called it justice or liberation the other day. I call this, to me, as like an OT and an accessibility person, is universal design, which is basically the concept that we're trying to make things as accessible to as many people as possible. So there are very few things that like are perfect universal design. It's like a rare specimen. But thinking about universal design as we're preparing lessons and curriculum and programming and events, that's how I kind of see the world, and that helps me make sure that as many people as possible can participate. So there are some great examples of universal design in the world, like curb cuts, for example, which were originally created by and for the disability community. Like there was a time prior to, I don't remember what year it was, but curbs used to just like be, you know, flat, and there was no sloping area, and people with disabilities just like could barely go anywhere if they used a wheelchair or, you know, a device. They could only get to the end of the block. So curb cuts were made for disabled people, but many people love curb cuts. You know, parents with strollers, people carrying grocery carts. So curb cuts are like a way to, that's how I think of universal design. Like lots of people use and appreciate curb cuts. And it's the same with captions. I mean, captions were created for the deaf community, but I like to use captions. They help me understand shows like Game of Thrones when I can't understand the accents. Captions are wonderful for people with auditory processing issues. So thinking about how we can create a curriculum and a learning environment that is available and accessible to as many people as possible. Universal design. There's also like the concept of universal design for learning, which is fun to think about.
Alana, by the way, Lee, thank you, typed into the chat box about Microsoft Meetings. I've heard that has automatic captions. So if any of your schools are using that, that'll be really helpful.
Yeah. I have trouble with that program. It like never quite works well for me, but it does have automatic captioning. We wanted to just address that 20% of the population has some kind of disability. So that means that more than likely you know someone with a disability, you're related to someone with a disability, or you have a disability, or if you don't have a disability, that you may someday, if you live long enough, God willing, either temporarily, permanently, situationally. I think for a lot of people, thinking and talking about disability brings up some feelings of mortality and vulnerability, and there's a little bit of a barrier there just because it can feel awkward, and that's why I think of disability as part of the human experience, part of the human condition. It's something that most people will experience to some extent at some point, and that it affects every other marginalized group. It affects all races, gender, you know, religions, everything. So we should practice anticipating that we will have families and kids with all kinds of disabilities in our communities, and expect that, and plan for that. So, there's many organizations that will say like, oh, we don't need an interpreter. No deaf people come to this. Well, like, of course they don't, because you don't have an interpreter. So that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. Like, you hire an interpreter tomorrow and then next week you have 100 deaf congregants. But preparing for those things creates a community where it is a natural part of your community. So thinking about that 20% number and thinking about that it's just part of life, I think will help break up some of that discomfort a little bit, and just seeing the world that way, or even just practicing seeing the world that way, can be really helpful. Anything else you want to share about that, Gab?
No, that was awesome, Alana. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you being here tonight. We were thrilled to have 60 teachers sign up on a Sunday night, 2 weeks before your school year is starting, to think about inclusion. And so that's really encouraging for us. So before we go forward with some strategies, we're going to give you guys a chance to talk to each other. I know in these webinar style formats, we're going to share a lot of info with you, but we're going to give you guys about 5 minutes now. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. And Alana, while I'm getting that set up, do you want to just talk about these 3 questions that we'll talk about in the breakout?
So obviously, I, as an OT, we switched to online learning very quickly. March 13th was our last day of school, and we were like doing online stuff immediately. So it was not necessarily the thing we prepared for the most. So it's interesting to reflect on that time, especially now that we have a little more prep time, although still feels like not enough. So I think some helpful conversation topics are, when you taught online last spring, what did work well for your students? What kind of students really struggled? And for those students that struggled, what kinds of solutions did you come up with on the spot or during that time? And what can we think about to prepare for an even more successful year?
So we're going to take about 5 minutes in your breakout room. So be conscious, make sure that you're allowing everyone to share. So you'll probably have about 5 people. So just monitor yourself. It means you'll have about a minute to share, and then about 3 to 4 minutes to listen. And I think I'm saying this out loud to you because hopefully we'll be using breakout rooms in our virtual teaching to build this kind of community. And we have to model this for our kids, that you can't get into the breakout room and spend the whole 5 minutes on you. So the more like we're conscious of modeling that and saying out loud to the kids to teach them. So here you go, and we'll see you back after the breakout rooms. Jennifer, did you get assigned to a breakout room? Alana, you could put the slides back up.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if they were or not, honestly.
Cool, thank you. So as you're coming back, please feel free to put in the chat box. Now your notes are up. Now,
Dude, I was wondering if that would happen. All right, let me try.
You want to try again? As you're coming back, why don't you put in the chat box? That's perfect, Alana.
Okay.
Any of the solutions that you talked about in your group. So if you had a particular solution, please share it in the chat box. So Alana shared muting. What was that about, Alana?
We were just talking about like learning more about the controls of Zoom and like being able to be the one to control the mute button. And so kids, instead of like all sharing at once or whatever, you can raise your hand and you can sort of like call on them.
And that took a while for a lot of us as teachers to catch on to that. Using breakout rooms for one-on-one support, raising hand through the Zoom, recognizing that teachers and kids don't need to remain seated the entire time. Thank you, Sarah. Absolutely. Let's keep that Aleph Bet yoga going. I've had some great experience with theater over Zoom. There's a lot you can do with movement. Smaller groups and one-on-one, Barbara, thank you. Annotating as a reward, but also getting them involved using that annotate feature. Awesome. Trying to keep the regular school routines. Oh, Carolyn, you read our mind. We're going to talk a lot about why routines are more important than ever. Using videos, Benita, thank you. And shorter sessions, absolutely. Been thinking about sort of the maximum time that kids should be on Zoom. Keep the lessons short. Yep, absolutely, Abby. Thank you. Making things more interactive, solving a student's questions without pausing the class. Nice. Yeah, everything doesn't have to be electronic. Yes, no response. It can be kitschy. Have fun with it. Absolutely. You, Alana, you do some like hand signals.
Yeah, I sometimes try to use, I mean, it didn't always work, but there's like the reaction buttons, like with the little clapping hands or the thumbs up. Sometimes I can use those reaction buttons.
Cool. All right, let's go on to the next slide. These are great solutions that you guys came up with.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a behavior detective over Zoom versus in the classroom. You know, if you've been teaching in a classroom for a while, you've probably gotten fairly good at being a behavior detective and knowing how to read body language and trying to figure out what's going on with your students, which might be a little bit more challenging on Zoom. So we're going to try this thing called Poll Everywhere, which is an interactive thing that you can maybe try with some kids, depending on how old they are, maybe. So I'm going to ask you two questions. I'll go to the new slide so you'll see. But the first question will be, what are some signs you can read that students are engaged in learning? And then what are some signs you can see that students are struggling? So here, we're going to try it. We're going to wait till it comes up. Okay, so here's the question. What are some signs that a student is engaged? And to answer the question, you can go to, you can see the website. I'm going to put it in the link too, just so you have it. So
you see it, Alana.
Great. So the website is pollev.com/my-name, Alana Raffel 785. And then you should be able to answer the question. If this is too complicated or annoying to you to do it this way, feel free to put your answer in the chat. So the question again is, what are some signs that a student is engaged on Zoom?
If you would try the Poll Everything, you'll see something really cool happen.
Yes, I would love for you to try it. It's a fun interactive.
You can open up a cell phone and just type in the browser, Poll EV. All right, thanks guys. Your answers are coming up now.
So if they're looking at their screens, singing and dancing along, leaning forward, smiling, laughing, asking questions, making eye contact, actively participating in the discussion if they are actually responsive, great. Answering questions, they ask questions. Pollev.com, oh, that's weird, Carolyn. Pollev.com, that's really weird. I don't know why it didn't work. That link didn't work. Answering questions, asking questions, smiling, eye contact, looking at the camera, participating, thumbs up. Great. I'll give you a couple more minutes because it looks like you were having trouble, Carolyn. I don't know how, it's weird.
Yeah.
I think it's because you didn't paste the entire link. You just put the pollev.com. And so if you didn't use the HTTPS and all that.
Oh, maybe.
I just put it in there. Now it's a hyperlink. So
okay, thanks,
Sarah. Participating, nodding. leaning into the camera.
Great.
This is going to be really interesting, Alana, when
Yeah.
we talk more about the camera since that's coming up.
Sitting up,
Smiles.
down on their phone, smiling.
Yeah. So it's just going to be really interesting as we think about the range of kids, as we were going back to what we talked about earlier, right? That a lot of these responses, when we think about being a behavior detective, for many of our what we call neurotypical kids, looking at the camera, smiling, eye contact, are going to mean that they're engaged.
Right.
But for those of you who know a little bit about our students on the autism spectrum, these answers aren't necessarily going to be indicative that kids on the spectrum are engaged. So it's really important. Part of what we want you to leave this training with is thinking, oh, for some students, I know they're engaged when they're smiling and we've got eye contact and their camera's on. But we might have that 20% of the kids who are very engaged, but they're not going to be smiling or necessarily making contact in the camera. So we want to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Looking into the camera. Yeah. So that, right. So this is a really interesting thing because when parents let me know, that's helpful to talk, communicating with parents, which we'll talk about. But yeah, the looking into the camera thing, I think we all know that sometimes, like, I don't have I like having my screen on and kind of looking at myself and seeing my own face, but I know that many people do not. My mom, who's a social worker, I think is like exhausted from like looking at herself during appointments with clients. Many people do not like to look at the camera. Even neurotypical people I've talked to who, should we pause and talk about neurotypical?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just so to back it up a little bit. So Gabby and I often use the terms neurotypical and neurodivergent, which is the autism community's like preferred terms, usually, I would say. A neurotypical brain is someone that doesn't necessarily have autism or ADHD, something like that. And people who are autistic and many other communities as well. The autistic community uses it the most, but they use terms like neurodivergent, and neurodiversity is just like the breadth of all different kinds of brains and experiences. So when I say neurodivergent, I usually mean someone who maybe is autistic or has ADHD or both. So,
and Alana, I want to just appreciate the two comments that came in from Carolyn. First, right, the people can at least hide their own video. So you're looking at the other screens and not yourself. And Abby is very wise in being a behavior detective to say, some kids could be looking at the screen and appear to be engaged because they could have a whole nother thing going on that they're engaged with. So
right, they're deep in Minecraft or something.
Yeah, so that is all part of this challenge we're facing of online teaching. Absolutely. Thanks to both of you.
Yeah. So it's a similar thing, just to acknowledge that many autistic people do not enjoy, some autistic people love eye contact. I've heard of many stories of especially autistic women who are like empaths and love eye contact, and many autistic people do not enjoy it. And to force them to do that might make it hard for them to learn, actually, because they're trying so hard to make eye contact or look at the camera that then the learning goes out the window. So I mean, partially this question is like a sham, because yes, and also maybe not, and no. So it's great to think about, but to think about it with a grain of salt, I guess, is what I would say. Yeah. So here's our next question, probably similarly complicated, but what are some signs that a student is struggling? So it should be this.
That you can see on Zoom. How could you tell that a student is struggling? Right. So we'll ask you to try the pollev.com again. Mm-hmm. And Alana, you're just going to go to the same link, right?
Yeah, because it's like whatever question is up, that's the one it goes to. I'm going to try to type it into my. Yeah, so when I type it into my like browser, it comes up. Yeah, so far we got sitting back in the chair, not participating, leaving the screen. I assume that means like walking away maybe, or going on to a different screen. Blank stares, not talking, playing around with the virtual background or the camera, not participating, not responding, or maybe being disruptive, eloping, so like maybe leaving the screen or leaving the room, turning your video off, muted constantly with video off, not showing up at all. Yeah, if they just like don't come to class, that's an important red flag, I would say. Making silly faces, maybe hand motion, face palming, or hands, right? So maybe like being like, oof, just being able to read those kinds of body language, asking, when is this over? Typing random stuff into the chat, screaming, yeah, shut down, disappearing, not responding, yeah, leaving.
Yeah. And I'm just like, this is just striking me with how, we've all, I recognize so many of you are super experienced educators and have lots of ways to engage kids who look like they're struggling when you're sitting in the room with them, whether it's giving them the opportunity to go get a drink of water, run an errand to the office, take a movement break with a fantastic tap team, maybe give them some extra word, give them that putty you have, all these things we have, and that now these new sets of challenges because we're doing virtual teaching. So Alana, this is good. We're at 7:34 and we're going to move into thinking about some strategies and accommodations.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we really hear you with all of these things.
Yeah, I'm just reading the last couple.
I know.
Yeah, and we can talk more about this, but this is a very, similar thing that I want teachers to keep in mind, that we want to give our students the same flexibility that we would give ourselves. So if you might get up and go to the bathroom or get a drink of water during a professional development, then like giving our students that same opportunity is valuable, I would say. So yes and no, as per your, yes and maybe and no, and all of the above. Will you be able to see this after you are done? Are you referring to the slides? Definitely, we're happy to share the slides. I don't know if these answers from the poll will save, but we'll definitely share slides with you.
And I am trying to record the webinar too, so we'll send that out if the recording works, but our slides for sure. So I wanted to take a moment before we get into accommodations. First of all, I think I want to invite everyone to actually take a deep breath, if you will, because that was a lot, a lot that comes up and pushes our anxiety as teachers, like kids crying and leaving the room and turning off their video and all of these things. And it creates stress for us because we want to create a great learning classroom experience. And so what I want to invite you to adopt is what we call an inclusion mindset, which is really just a switch in perspective, that when we see those behaviors, when we see the nasty comments going into the chat or leaving the room or, the hands over the face, that instead of us going to a place of either anger or frustration or exasperation, that student is being disrespectful, disruptive, I can't believe they're doing this, where are the parents, whoever taught them manners, all these tapes that start triggering us, that what if we just switched our mindset to how can we help the student? So in that, I want us to just do an exercise for a minute. Imagine you're teaching class and it all seems to be going along well. And you have one student in particular who's seemed okay, somewhat engaged. And it's the middle of the class and they've now turned their camera off. Type into the chat room, besides them being disengaged or bored, what could another reason be? We're just imagining right now that they might have, why did they turn off their video? So if something comes to you, Carolyn, there you go, a bathroom break. Sarah, anxiety. They could be overstimulated. Scott, thank you. Maybe something's going on in the background. Or they're hungry and they just left. Danielle, they're crying and they didn't want anyone else to see. Amy, something happened in their home. Absolutely. Bonnie, need to talk to a parent. Michelle, someone came in. Suzanne, didn't want anyone to see them. Robin, too much happening. A parent and sibling were arguing. Yeah, this is amazing, guys. Thank you for coming up with this list. Just needed a break. Overwhelmed, distracted by pets. Absolutely. Not forgetting that we're going to look at this in a moment, that the home is the classroom. Maybe it's a happy distraction that a very excited pet comes in the room or a younger sibling. All these different things. Absolutely. So before we go into this place of getting frustrated, they're not paying attention to my lesson, Michelle put something very important up, that the house is messy. This has been coming up a lot, that people, it's not comfortable for everyone to see into the home. The phone rings, all of these things. Thank you, guys. And so this will really help us if we can remember to take that deep breath before jumping to conclusion about why their camera's off, that it may just be all these other things that have absolutely nothing to do with us, what amazing teachers we are, and what a fantastic lesson we created. Alana, back to you.
Absolutely good. So we're going to go into talk a little bit about some accommodations. This list is by no means exhaustive. Yes, Amy was just talking about virtual backgrounds. We can definitely talk more about that. This list is not exhaustive. Some things overlap. Just a starting place to give you some ideas. I'm always happy to continue this conversation about accommodations. It's something I'm learning as I go, so we can learn together. So the first piece that I'll talk about is attention. So how do we address attention in the virtual setting? Many of you already mentioned this in the breakout group and in the chat, that the length of activities on Zoom may need to be different than it is in person. We're not as able to engage for as long on Zoom. It just takes more out of you for some reason. And so remembering to keep things short and sweet can be very helpful for many people. Again, this was also mentioned, creating structure, routine, and then repeating it consistently. So even with our TAP teens, which we did our 4-day training last week with the TAP teens, there were certain things that I did the same way every single night, because that meant that once we did it the first time, and these are teens, it's a little bit different, but once we did it the first time, I didn't have to explain it the next 3 nights that much. I still did, just in case I had a new student who wasn't there last time, but they knew, this certain, we talk about this at the beginning, at the end we do this activity every time, and it helps them prepare and understand what to do. It makes things easier, and it significantly decreases anxiety if you know the drill. Also with attention, we may want to talk to our students about some fidget tools that they might want to have. And that doesn't necessarily need to be something fancy. Like I doodle often when I'm watching a professional development or a workshop. I'm frequently like doodling like mad. And that's, so I think it runs in my family. I've seen my mom do it so much.
Can I show my fidget?
Oh yeah, what is yours?
This is just a piece of GIMP. My daughter likes to, make the different knots and stuff like that, and she has a bunch. And I like something while I'm learning or teaching that I can twist around my fingers. Yeah. And that's about as much as I need to stay focused.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I always have water. So there's just a couple and again, this is something that I want to empower you to be able to talk about. So it doesn't need to be like, oh, I hope they have something, good luck. It's something that you can address right on. You can say like, hey, do you have something there to help you focus? Do you want to go get a pencil and, do something, you could put yourself on mute and tap your pencil. Do you want to go get a piece of tape? And it's something you can talk about. You don't need, it's not a secret. It can
And
be.
you can, Alana, you can, when you're emailing the parents with a, welcome to, Kita Bet, whatever, you can say, we're going to be on Zoom for 30 minutes. And if your kids need some putty or, like you said, a piece of tape or whatever will help them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and some conversation in the chat about that. Yeah, we as teachers, as adults, absolutely, that's right, Lisa. People bring knitting to their meetings all the time to sit and focus, and that it's a good thing to normalize.
Yeah, for sure, and just being able to talk about it out loud, so you're not making it like, oh, you have to hide your fidget, or it's much easier for a kid if they just know, like, it's okay, like, make it functional, make it appropriate as much as possible. That's great. So some things about attention, again, not exhaustive, but just some ideas to get you started. Thinking about sensory needs for kids. And this is like a whole new world of challenge for us. Thinking about how to address the sensory setting and the sensory environment when we're not in the same place, when they're at home, we don't have control over it. Even if it's hard enough to do at school where it's maybe not the classroom that we own and we don't have endless money. So it's hard enough. And now it's like a whole other level of challenging. But there are some things that we can do. And I think, again, it starts with having the conversation. So not just like assuming that it's fine or like they'll figure it out or the family will deal with it, but just like opening up that conversation with the family, with the kid, if they're able to have that conversation. So like, where are you sitting? What kind of chair are you sitting in? Is it comfortable? Is it supportive? Can you sit upright in it? Is it noisy there? Is it not noisy enough? Is it too quiet and it's making you like space out? Do you have your fidgets or something that you can use to keep yourself alert? And thinking about the visual clarity of your screen. So I feel like so much of our world is like educators is like bright, colorful pictures. No. And especially like some classrooms, I think people think like the more things you put on the wall, the better. But actually for many of our students, less is more. And it's much easier to like take in information when there's much less on the screen. For some kids, they need maybe every word to be there. If they have a hearing impairment or some auditory processing issues, they need more language up there. So it's a little bit about finding a balance. Of course, there's always going to be this conflict between what different people need, but making things as clear as possible on your screen is helpful. But again, being able to talk about these things like openly, it will bring up new things. It will spark new conversations and ideas. I think the basic, the most like the gist of this is having the conversation and talking about like, and even me, even as an OT, I need to practice doing this more, talking to my kids about like, what's it like over it? Like, how is it? What do we need to change? How can I help you fix it? And normalizing that conversation. The next part to think about is, where is school? So again, some overlap with that sensory piece, but what does school look like for you? Is there a desk? And if there's not a desk, how can we address that? Can you get a clipboard or a heavy book to lean on? How can we make sure that there's something, if you are doing some writing, to make sure that there's something stable? What is the room like? Are they in the TV room? Where are you? Are there multiple siblings doing Zoom things at one time? Sometimes you won't be able to control for that. You can't necessarily say, okay, go into a different room as your sibling. That might just be the situation. Let's work it out. Let's figure out what we can do. Do we need to get headphones going? Whatever. Do they need a parent there for support, which isn't necessarily possible for every family, but for some families it might be. And if we can address that and communicate with the parent and make sure that they can be there, that might be helpful. And again, communicating with the parent. So brainstorming together, maybe where the best place for that student to be, and not necessarily just assuming that they'll work it out, but actually like addressing it, front and center. Let's talk about it. Visual learners. So many students, again, if they have some auditory processing difficulties, or just sometimes auditory directions are hard. It's hard to remember. So creating some really good, clear visuals will be helpful, especially schedules, which really decreases anxiety. So here's an example of visual schedule that I made as an example. So it just has like, I make these on Canva, but I'm sure you can make it with clip art or whatever, and I can I'm happy to teach you how to use Canva someday. It's really easy and mostly free. And just showing them what we're going to do. We're going to do a welcome. We're going to do Shabbat Shalom, candle lighting. So preparing them ahead of time to know what's coming. So that's an example of a visual schedule. Really easy and helpful tool. Thinking about social connection. So how can we still address this need for social connection between our students when that's really hard to achieve on the internet? So thinking about maybe incorporating more icebreakers, games, check-ins, maybe than you would in a normal like internet.
Oh, Alana, can I pause you for 1 sec?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to say, Robin was saying, it was that chart and the visual, you made Canva. Canva was what you used for the visual schedule.
Yes, I use, I use a website called Canva, Canva, which.
And I also wanted to just address, Lee had put up a bigger question, and I said at the end we will stay on for some Q&A.
Yes.
And Scott, just going back to the point of less is more with the visual stimulation, Scott said, any thoughts about times during class hiding the students' videos to focus on visual content?
I think that's
kind of in the way we are tonight.
Yeah, great. I love that idea. If what you're doing is not about social interaction, you might not need their videos up. They can even shut their videos off and just focus on the content, or changing it so it's just the speaker showing. I'm going to go through this succinctly now because I see we're running out of time. So thinking about doing more games, and then really like trying to address your students' interests. What are they excited about? And incorporating that as much as possible, especially if this is a new class, new students, really bringing in much more of that like social piece. And then using your teen helpers, your Madra theme as much as possible to use breakout rooms. I really like with our TAP teens, every night we do like a reflection, and so many of them said that I always think they're going to be annoyed by breakout rooms. Like, ugh, don't put us in breakout rooms. You have to really like connect or whatever. But so many of them said breakout rooms were their favorite part of the program, which I was shocked about. But they loved, I think they're probably all like me, aching for connection right now. And so having a couple minutes to talk to their peers was like wonderful to them. I was shocked. But so getting to use those teen helpers to really do those breakout rooms. And last but not least, thinking about that some students may really be experiencing anxiety. Zoom might cause anxiety. Being like on the internet, this whole experience may cause anxiety. And so how can we be thinking about that, open to addressing that, creating routine, which again will really help decrease anxiety. And then something that Gabby and I always do, and I always do with my students, is saying like, if you don't want to share out loud, just type it in the chat box. That's a way. I still know you're listening. I know that you've engaged with me, and you don't, if you're not comfortable sharing out loud right now, just type it in the chat box, or doing something like a poll everywhere, or Mentimeter I saw is another one, where they can engage without having to necessarily engage in that way. Whiteboard, there's many ways to get students to engage and show that they're participating, learning, without forcing them to go out of their comfort zone in that way. But really, it's hard to teach and read the chat box, which I'm doing right now. It is, yeah, and it might, I think being able to, I think one of the best things we can do for our students is to say out loud, like, this isn't easy, we're figuring this out, it's kind of an experiment. Give me a second, I need to read what's in the chat box right now, hold on. And taking a second to read the chat box, and you don't need to necessarily be doing everything. You don't need to be like a multitasker supreme. I like to be sometimes. Multitasking I find is one of my best skills, but if that's not your skill and you need a second to read the chat box, you can say to them, like, give me 1 minute. I'm going to read what's in the chat box right now. And that might decrease your anxiety. So,
and we definitely encourage, if you have a teen helper, put them to use. They can totally monitor the chat box. They can lead a Kahoot or another game, use them so that you can have that moment to catch your breath and just monitor the kids.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea, Carolyn. Like we're always thinking about what our teams can do. So that's a wonderful thing that they can do for you. So those are some ideas. I hope they help you get started.
So I wanted to take a moment and just going back to that, what we can do with not being overwhelmed with this entire process, and acknowledging that this is going to be a different teaching experience for us, a different kind of year. And it's always an important part of our teaching process to take that time after class to reflect. And I just think that this year, now more than ever, we need to build the reflection time in. Buy yourself a beautiful journal if you want to write your thoughts in. If you want to open a new Google Doc called, Teaching 5781, whatever is going to work for you. If you want to find a buddy, find someone on your teaching team who you can take 5 minutes and get on FaceTime with or call after the day is over, and that you think about, were your students engaged during class? What could I do? What will I do differently next time? Which activities got them excited and interested? And it's not going to be every time. Sometimes you're going to try a game or a different activity, and maybe it won't go that well. But really taking that reflection time, and like I said, finding a partner, writing, whatever it is for you, but that we have to up our game and paying attention about what works in our teaching. Are all of the things that Alana and I shared tonight, it's wonderful if you can talk with your students, but we know for that many of our kids, especially those who are younger or those who have significant cognitive challenges, our parents are our best partners in helping us to support that child. I also want to acknowledge this is and many of you are parents or grandparents who are on this webinar. This is such a challenging time for parents, balancing home, school, their work demands, a pandemic going on, keeping everyone safe and healthy, getting groceries. Everything is hard. And for parents whose kids have any kind of learning, attention, behavioral challenge, it's been extremely hard. Not all parents are getting the services they need from their school. There are many kids whose districts are having online learning, and the kids simply aren't able to learn that way. Services have been put on hold, or they're not being delivered in the same ways. It's a stressful time. So just know that, for you, your top priority might be the Hebrew school classroom. And for these parents, it may not be. And so, reaching out with that sensitivity in mind, asking the parents, that I want to be on the team with you. What's the best way? Do you want me to call you? Is it better if I just send a quick text? Ask the parents. Is there a best time? Maybe, Sunday afternoon, right after the Hebrew school time. They do not want to get that call. They're home with all, the kid or multiple kids. And other parents, it might be, how often do you want to hear from me? Some parents want a weekly report, some want a monthly report, some just want to hear if there's a problem, so everyone's going to be different. But I really encourage you to bring your sensitivity and your empathy and your kindness to the parents, and let them know that you are on the team with them to create the best experience possible for their kids. So let's take another deep breath again. Alana, should we read this out loud or just invite people to read it to themselves?
Because of accessibility best practice, I'll say let's read it out loud.
Go for it.
So it says, I am listening. I'm not looking into your eyes because I'm trying to concentrate on your words. I am paying attention. I just can't process any more information. I do have feelings. My facial expression just doesn't match. I did notice, I just wasn't sure how to respond. I try to connect, but it's still hard to relate. I do care. I just find it hard to translate how I feel in a way that makes sense to others. I do want to talk to you. I'm just not so good in a crowded room. I'm not being badly behaved. I get anxious and overwhelmed by my senses. I'm not being rude, lazy, or antisocial. I use earphones, sleep, and solitude as coping strategies. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to say that our brains are wired differently.
And I put this in here just to remember all those kids who may be responding in a way that is different than what you anticipate. And to know that there are all kinds of different ways our brains are wired, and that all the kids are part of your community. So we did it. We promised you guys we were gonna give you strategies and support and help you get ready and get your mindset on for your new school year. It is 7:58. I know Lee had a question. If anyone else has a question, we'll stick around for another, few minutes to, oh, you are so welcome, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. So if you have a question, we will be happy to answer. Lee, so why don't you go ahead and unmute, and why don't you tell us what was on your mind? And anyone else who wants to take off, you're welcome to take off.
Hi, Gabby. Thanks.
Sure.
Couple things. First, the Germantown Jewish Center, we have a faculty meeting following this, so I'm going to pop off as soon as I'm done.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we're busy.